She was just 14 months old, wobbling on the porch with a toy in her hand. He was the rescue dog with a broken past, quiet eyes, and no voice to tell his story. They were alone for only a moment. But sometimes, a moment is all it takes for everything to change. No one could explain what he did next. In a single, breathless instant, he made a choice, one that would leave a scar, reveal a truth, and rewrite what it means to love without hesitation. If you've ever wondered what loyalty looks like when it has no words, stay. Like, subscribe, and join us. Because this story isn't just unforgettable, it's undeniable. The morning sky over Boulder, Colorado, was an endless sheet of pale blue brushed with soft streaks of autumn gold. Crisp, dry air carried the scent of fallen leaves and chimney smoke, whispering of a season shifting quietly into cold. On the edge of town, where neighborhoods gave way to dry open fields, sat a modest one-story brick building, the Boulder County Animal Rescue Center. Its parking lot was almost empty, save for one navy blue Subaru with a dented back door and a faded child sticker on the rear window. Claire Harper stepped out, tightening her light gray cardigan across her chest. She was 32, tall and narrow-shouldered, with soft hazel eyes that always seemed alert, scanning, measuring. Her brown hair, once flowing and carefree, was now pulled into a permanent ponytail, the mark of someone who didn't have time to be frivolous. Claire had been a pediatric nurse for over 8 years, working mostly night shifts since her daughter was born. She moved with the kind of quiet efficiency only single mothers or emergency room staff understood, always one hand ready to catch a fall, the other already holding tomorrow's worry. Trailing close behind her, half waddling, half trotting, was June, Claire's daughter, a pale-skinned girl just over 14 months old. Her chubby cheeks were still pink from the morning chill, and her soft brown curls bounced above her collar as she took uneven steps along the concrete path. June wore a lemon-yellow puffer jacket, a bit too big, with a tiny fox-shaped backpack hanging awkwardly from her shoulders. She held a leaf in one hand, utterly fascinated, and paid no attention to where they were going. Claire paused at the shelter entrance, drawing in a breath. She wasn't sure if this was a good idea. The decision to adopt a dog hadn't come on a whim, it had come on the 4th night in a row where June wouldn't sleep unless Claire held her for hours, and the loneliness that lingered once the baby was finally still. Claire had tried therapy. Tried sleep training. Tried calling her mother, only to be reminded that single mothers had it harder in my day. What she hadn't tried was softness. Connection. Not just for June, but for herself. The door creaked as they stepped into the lobby, a mix of antiseptic cleaner and wet fur filled the air. A woman with cropped silver blonde hair looked up from behind the desk and smiled. Her name tag read, Sarah, Volunteer Coordinator. Sarah was in her early 60s, short and broad-shouldered, with laugh lines that pulled at her cheeks even when she wasn't smiling. She carried herself like someone who had seen the worst of people and still chose kindness, a former schoolteacher, perhaps, now spending retirement with creatures who didn't talk back. "You must be Claire," she said, voice warm. "And this little explorer must be June." Claire gave a half-smile. "That obvious?" Sarah chuckled. Mothers come in with one of two expressions. Either, "Help me find a new family member," or, "Please, dear God, let this work." You're both. Claire glanced down at June, who was now trying to poke her finger through a hole in her jacket. "I guess I'm just hoping to find something steady. Quiet. Loyal. Those are the best kinds," Sarah said, then gestured toward the back. "Let me show you someone." They walked down a hallway lined with kennels. Most of the dogs barked as they passed, high, eager yelps or sharp, warning growls. Some jumped at the chain-link fences, others pawed at the air. Claire's anxiety rose with every step. But then, at the far end, sat one dog who didn't move. He didn't bark. Didn't flinch. Didn't even rise to his feet. He simply stared. The dog was a young German shepherd, tall but still lanky in that adolescent way. His coat was a rich blend of black and sable brown, with soft fuzz still clinging to his flanks. His ears, one perked straight up, the other flopping slightly, gave him a perpetually curious expression. But what Claire noticed most were his eyes, large, deep, and strangely wise for a dog so young. "That's Bruno," Sarah said softly. "He came in 3 weeks ago. Just turned a year. No history of violence, just intense. Overprotective. The last owner gave him up because he kept placing himself between the baby and anyone who came near." Claire's brow furrowed. "That's not a bad thing. Not to you. But the father thought it was too much. Said Bruno wouldn't chill out. We don't know much before that. He was originally listed as a rescue from Arizona, trained briefly as a search dog. Didn't pass." Claire took a cautious step closer. Bruno didn't react. He simply sat, motionless, eyes on her, no tail wag, no growl, just quiet presence. June let out a small squeal of delight and toddled forward before Claire could stop her. Bruno's gaze shifted. For a moment, Claire's breath caught. But Bruno didn't tense. Didn't bark. Instead, he lowered his head slightly and took one careful step toward June. She reached out and gently patted the fence between them, giggling. Claire bent down slowly. "He's so still." Sarah nodded. "We think he's waiting. Watching. Like he's not sure he's welcome yet." And then, with a soft, deliberate movement, Bruno raised one paw and rested it against the chain-link gate. June squealed again, clapping her hands. Claire stared. Something in her chest ached. She didn't believe in fate, not really, but this felt close. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she murmured. Sarah smiled gently. "Sometimes, we don't choose healing. It shows up anyway." Claire looked at her daughter. Then at the dog. Then nodded. The wind had picked up over Boulder, ushering in the deeper cold of late October. Leaves no longer rustled, they scattered. The morning started in silence, coated in frost, and the evenings ended early, with sun slipping behind the Rockies like a secret. It had been 6 days since Claire Harper brought Bruno home, and her modest 2-bedroom house had begun to shift, not in furniture or paint, but in rhythm. Bruno was not a loud dog. He didn't bark when the doorbell rang, didn't whine when left alone, and didn't chase his tail or tear up the throw pillows. In fact, he hardly seemed like a young dog at all. His energy, instead of chaotic, came through in quiet determination, like the way he followed June room to room, always keeping just a few paces behind her, alert but never imposing. His loyalty wasn't loud. It was watchful. Claire noticed it the second morning, as she prepared bottles in the kitchen. June, still wobbly on her feet, had wandered into the living room, chasing dust motes through the sunlight. Bruno didn't move from his corner, until June approached the edge of the staircase. Then, with surgical calm, he stood, crossed the room, and positioned his body between her and the stairs. No growl. No bark. Just presence. Claire was standing in the doorway when it happened. She didn't say anything. But she saw. And she remembered. Every day brought more of these moments. In the afternoons, Claire took June and Bruno into the backyard. June would toddle through piles of leaves while Bruno sat just beyond reach, watching. Not playing. Not interacting, even when June babbled at him in a language only toddlers understood. But his eyes followed her everywhere. Claire's trust didn't come all at once. At first, she still made sure June never touched Bruno's tail. Never pulled his ear. Never offered food from her little hands. But Bruno never showed agitation. Only patience. On the 7th night, June fell asleep on the couch mid-cartoon. Claire was folding laundry beside her and Bruno lay near the fireplace, his head resting on his paws. Claire, tired, threw a small blanket over her daughter and reached for her phone. That's when the silence pulled her. She stared at the two of them, June's tiny hand dangling off the couch edge, her chest rising and falling softly. And Bruno, now awake, not moving, just watching her breathe. A lump formed in Claire's throat. She didn't understand how such a young dog could be so old in the ways that mattered. Later that evening, she opened her laptop. She hadn't used it for anything personal in months. Between work, diapers, and trying to sleep in 90-minute intervals, the idea of writing anything had felt distant, indulgent. But now, something stirred. She opened a blank page and typed, "My daughter just fell asleep on a couch next to a 70-pound dog I swore I would never trust. He hasn't moved in 40 minutes. I think I'm the one learning." And then she kept typing. She called the blog Home with Two Hearts. It started as a private log, somewhere to put the thoughts she never said aloud. About motherhood. About loneliness. About rediscovering softness when you've been told too many times to toughen up. Her first full post was about Bruno. Not just his actions, but his silence. His choice not to bark when he could. His decision to protect without asking to be noticed. She hit publish at 1:12 a.m. By morning, she had 7 subscribers. On the 10th day, Claire brought June and Bruno to a small park near the foothills. It was a weekday, just after noon, so the place was mostly empty. Only one other person sat on the bench near the sandbox, a teenage boy wearing a gray hoodie and frayed jeans. He had earbuds in and was sketching in a small spiral notebook. Claire gave a polite nod, then laid out a blanket near the tree. June wandered through the grass, humming to herself. Bruno stood beside Claire, tail still, posture loose but upright. The boy looked up briefly. His face was pale, scattered with freckles, and framed by shaggy dark hair. He looked no older than 16. He glanced at Bruno, blinked once, then smiled faintly, not out of joy, but recognition. "German Shepherd?" he asked. Claire nodded. "Just over a year. His name's Bruno." The boy held out his drawing pad for a second. It was a pencil sketch of a dog. Not exact, but it carried the same posture. The same strength. He shrugged. "I had one once." "Had?" He paused. "He died last winter. Coyotes, up north." There was a quiet understanding in his voice. Not bitterness. Not dramatics. Just loss. "I'm sorry," Claire said. The boy nodded. "You're lucky. That one, he's watching her like a soldier." Claire turned to look. June was digging her hands into the dirt near the tree roots. Bruno hadn't moved, but his eyes tracked her hands. Every twitch. Every giggle. Back home that night, Claire wrote again. This time, about how dogs carry grief too, but don't turn it into something they pass on. About the way Bruno stood between June and the stairs. The way he didn't ask to be pet. Didn't push to be praised. Just stood there. Quietly guarding. Her post ended, some hearts bark. Some just beat. It was shared 17 times. That weekend, Sarah from the shelter called to check in. Claire was surprised. She hadn't expected follow-up, let alone warmth. But Sarah's voice crackled through the phone with genuine interest. She asked how Bruno was adjusting, whether he was eating, sleeping, bonding. Claire found herself smiling as she spoke. Sarah shared that Bruno had been on the list for possible behavioral transfer, a last resort term for dogs they weren't sure would be adopted. "But I always believed in him," Sarah said. "He didn't fail as a rescue dog. He just hadn't found the right person to rescue yet." Claire was silent for a moment, then said softly, "Maybe he didn't need to be trained to protect. Maybe he just needed someone small enough to matter." That night, Claire fell asleep on the couch. June was already curled against a pillow, thumb in mouth. And Bruno? He was lying by the front door, not because he was told to, but because he wanted to. Because something inside him had already decided, this is mine to guard. The morning sun rose reluctantly over Boulder, Colorado, casting long, amber streaks over the rooftops and sidewalks still glistening from the night's dew. It was the kind of crisp fall morning that made the air smell faintly of pine and fireplace smoke, the kind that whispered quiet promises of winter just around the corner. In the modest, tree-lined neighborhood where Claire Harper lived, everything seemed undisturbed. The leaves rustled gently in clusters of orange and red, and the sky stretched wide and cloudless, as if painted in one smooth breath. Inside the Harper household, the soft hum of the dishwasher and the faint click of the coffee pot filled the kitchen with a low, familiar rhythm. Claire, dressed in dark blue scrubs and her worn gray hoodie, was standing at the sink rinsing out a baby bottle with one hand and checking the clock on the microwave with the other. She had tied her long brown hair back in a loose braid, but stray wisps had already escaped to frame her face. Her eyes, usually sharp and practical, looked a little softer this morning. Perhaps it was the way the light hit her, or maybe it was something else. Claire was a pediatric nurse, known at Boulder County Medical Center for being calm in chaos and clear in emergencies. But at home, her superpower was different. It was her ability to do a dozen things at once without breaking stride. That morning, her mind was already juggling the coming shift, June's upcoming flu shot, and whether she remembered to thaw chicken for dinner. Still, her movements were gentle, deliberate. There was something about mornings like this that made her slow down. Just a few feet away, outside on the wooden front porch, June was playing in her oversized yellow puffer jacket, crouched next to a plastic stacking toy she had dragged out with her. The porch had 3 wide steps leading down to the yard, each lined with potted mums, some still blooming, some already wilted. The baby's cheeks were flushed from the cool air, and her fine brown curls peeked from under her little knit hat. She made little chirping sounds to herself as she tried to wedge one toy piece into another. Lying beside her, not 2 arm lengths away, was Bruno. Bruno, now a full week into his new home, had claimed this spot by the porch like a sentinel. He was just over a year old, a young German shepherd with thick black and sable fur and a frame that promised future strength. His ears were perpetually alert, one upright, the other always slightly tilted, lending him a touch of boyish mischief. But his eyes were his most striking feature, deep, amber, and unwavering. They held the kind of patience and weight that didn't match his age. That morning, Bruno wasn't playing. He wasn't napping. He lay on his belly, legs stretched out, head lifted just enough to keep June in his line of sight. His breathing was calm. His eyes never blinked for long. He didn't move, except for the slight flick of his ears when June laughed. Claire glanced out the window, smiling at the scene. It was becoming routine now, Bruno taking his post, June exploring the front steps or watching bugs crawl across the deck, and Claire, for once, feeling like she wasn't carrying everything alone. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She wiped her hands, picked it up, and checked the message, a shift change. Another nurse had called out sick, and now she was needed earlier. She sighed, tucking the phone into her back pocket. Just as she turned back to finish rinsing the bottle, she heard it. A sharp, hollow crash. It wasn't the clatter of a toy or the soft thunk of a child sitting down too hard. It was the sound of something ceramic hitting concrete. It sliced through the morning stillness like a snapped string. Claire froze. Her eyes darted toward the front door. Then she ran. The door flew open with a creak, bouncing off the wall. Claire's bare feet hit the porch and she scanned the space in one breath. Her eyes found the source. The terracotta planter that had been perched on the edge of the top stair now lay in pieces on the concrete walkway. Soil scattered across the step and onto the grass. One of the bright orange mums had been crushed under the weight. And beside the broken pieces, June sat, on her bottom, her face frozen in surprise, both hands on the ground to brace herself. Bruno was standing. Not in his usual calm posture but rigid, muscles coiled, tail stiff. He had positioned himself between June and the broken planter, his eyes wide and nostrils flaring. He wasn't barking, but there was an energy around him that hadn't been there before, like a wire stretched too tight. Claire's eyes swept June from head to toe. No blood. No bruises. Her daughter's lip trembled, but she hadn't cried. Yet. Then she noticed Bruno's shoulder, dusted in soil and scratched with thin red lines, marks from where the pot had likely grazed him when it fell. Or when he knocked it over. Claire dropped to her knees, gathering June into her arms. The baby gave a small whimper, then buried her face in Claire's neck. "It's okay," Claire whispered, brushing leaves from her daughter's jacket. "You're okay." When she looked up again, Bruno had moved a few steps back. His tail was low now, eyes unsure, head dipped in what looked almost like guilt. Claire exhaled slowly. Her first instinct had been fear, of what might have happened, of why the pot had fallen, of whether Bruno had misjudged. But now, looking at the position of the planter, the marks on Bruno, and the stunned look on June's face, the picture was different. June hadn't knocked it over. She had been too far. Claire stood, walked to Bruno, and knelt down. His body stiffened, expecting discipline. But instead, Claire placed a hand on his back, slowly, and whispered, "You moved her. You took the hit." Bruno didn't lift his head. But he stayed still under her touch. Inside, Claire placed June on the couch and went back to the porch with a broom and dustpan. As she swept up the pieces, her thoughts kept returning to that moment. The snap of sound. The shift in Bruno's posture. The way June had landed, safely, just out of the way. She was only gone for a minute. But in that minute, he'd acted. Later that night, Claire opened her blog. The house was quiet except for the low purring of the space heater and the occasional sigh from Bruno, curled up at the foot of June's crib. She titled the new post, "A Broken Pot, a Whole Heart." The next morning began like any other. The late October air had grown sharper overnight, and a thin shimmer of frost stretched across the rooftops and lawns of Claire's quiet neighborhood in Boulder. The sun had only just begun to melt the edges of the ice as golden light filtered through the skeletal branches above. Inside the Harper home, the familiar rhythm of a new day stirred to life, the drip of coffee into a chipped ceramic mug, the low hum of the heater kicking on, the rustle of toddler limbs beneath a cozy blanket. Claire Harper moved through the kitchen with practiced grace, pouring warm milk into June's favorite bottle. She still wore her pajama pants and a fleece-lined robe, her hair tied up in a messy knot that betrayed a night of fractured sleep. Her hands were steady, but her mind had begun cycling through the day's tasks, groceries, laundry, and the ever-present notes on her blog she wanted to finish before her next shift. June, now 15 months old, was just beyond the screen door, playing at the top of the front porch stairs. She had insisted on wearing her ladybug rain boots even though the ground was dry. Her tiny body wobbled slightly as she bent over to pick up a crumpled maple leaf, her face lit with the wonder only toddlers know, like every object held a secret waiting to be discovered. Bruno lay nearby, positioned halfway across the porch, angled just enough to keep June squarely within his field of vision. His sable and ink coat had thickened with the season, and the cold didn't seem to bother him. He had grown more confident in the past 2 weeks, still calm, still quiet, but less hesitant. There was now a sturdiness in his stance, as if he had accepted his place in the household not just as a guest, but as a guardian. Claire looked up from the sink, catching sight of the pair through the glass. The corners of her mouth softened. Moments like this, simple, quiet, had begun to string together, forming a fragile kind of peace. She turned back toward the counter, humming under her breath. Then came the sound. It wasn't like the sharp crash of a falling pot the day before. It was duller, more chaotic, a thud followed by the unmistakable buzzing of insects and the high, panicked cry of a child. Claire dropped the bottle, milk splattering across the tile, and bolted for the door. Outside, the scene was chaos. June was sprawled on her side near the second step, her tiny hands raised in reflex. Her face was twisted in terror, but she wasn't making a sound now, just wide, paralyzed eyes staring at the cloud of wasps swarming over the porch. And Bruno was in the thick of them. The shattered remains of a forgotten clay planter lay beside him, bits of dry soil and rotted roots strewn across the porch. Beneath it had been a hidden nest of yellow jackets, now stirred into violent frenzy. Dozens of them clung to Bruno's body, biting, stinging, burrowing into his dense fur. He stood over June like a living shield, his back arched, tail tucked, head lowered. Every muscle in his young frame shook with restraint, but he didn't move from his post. Claire screamed his name. Bruno didn't flinch. Instead, with a strength fueled by pure instinct, he used his body to nudge June down the last step and away from the porch, toward the dewy grass. Then he turned and staggered back, shaking his head as the swarm followed him. Claire ran to her daughter first, scooping June up into her arms. The girl whimpered softly, alive, conscious, her cheek bearing a small sting mark, but otherwise unharmed. That's when Claire saw him collapse. Bruno's legs gave out as he stumbled to the far edge of the porch. He hit the wooden boards with a heavy thump and lay there, sides heaving. His eyes were open but unfocused, his chest rising with shallow, erratic breaths. His snout was swollen, and angry red welts bloomed across his flanks and legs. One of his ears had gone limp, his whole body twitching from venom and pain. Claire didn't remember placing June on the couch or grabbing the keys or yelling into her phone. The world had narrowed to a tunnel, and in it was only Bruno, the young dog who didn't hesitate. A neighbor, Mr. Delgado, an older man with a hunched back and a soft spot for tinkering with birdhouses, appeared from across the street. His eyes widened as he took in the scene. Everything okay? Wasps. Porch. He got stung, a lot. Claire's voice was hoarse. Mr. Delgado nodded, already limping toward her side. He had always seemed like a background fixture, friendly, if quiet, but now, with purpose, he grabbed an old beach towel from her front step and helped lift Bruno's twitching body. Vet clinic off baseline, he muttered. I'll drive. Claire climbed into the back seat, cradling Bruno's massive head in her lap. He whimpered once, a low, muffled sound. Claire kept whispering to him, telling him it would be okay, that she was sorry, that she shouldn't have let June so close to the old pots. But Bruno couldn't hear her anymore. He had given everything just to keep one small life safe. At the vet clinic, the waiting room blurred around her. A tech named Rachel, tall, black, with close-cropped curls and lightning-quick hands, swept Bruno onto a gurney and disappeared behind double doors. Claire stayed with June, both of them smelling like smoke and earth and panic. They waited. And waited. An hour later, the vet, Dr. Maya Feldman, mid-40s, brisk but kind, with crow's feet that deepened when she frowned, approached Claire. Her lab coat had a pawprint patch over the left breast, and a streak of mud down one sleeve. He's stable, she said. But barely. He's had an allergic response, borderline anaphylactic. We've administered epinephrine and 4 fluids. He'll need close monitoring tonight. The swelling, it's severe. Claire's legs nearly gave out. That night, June slept curled up with a soft blanket in Claire's arms on the guest couch at the vet clinic. Bruno lay in a recovery crate down the hall, hooked to fluids, eyes closed, chest rising, still. Claire stayed awake until dawn. The waiting room was far too quiet. The cheap vinyl chairs creaked every time Claire shifted her weight, and the ticking of the wall clock sounded like it was mocking her. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and faint traces of wet fur, and the only other occupant was a woman in her 60s with a nervous dachshund in a polka-dot sling across her chest. She didn't speak, but her eyes occasionally flicked toward Claire, curious, perhaps, or simply trying to understand what kind of emergency made a mother show up barefoot, clutching a baby with leaves in her hair and a dog nearly unconscious in her arms. Claire's hoodie was streaked with dirt and sap. Her hands still trembled from the adrenaline spike that hadn't quite subsided. June had fallen asleep in her lap, the soft rise and fall of her chest the only thing keeping Claire tethered to the moment. Her daughter's cheeks were flushed from crying, and one of her sleeves bore a faint smear of blood from a scratch on her elbow. But she was safe. Alive. And that truth kept replaying in Claire's mind like a broken lullaby. Bruno was not with them. He was behind a set of closed doors, being treated by Dr. Feldman and her team. The image of him collapsing, his body twitching, his eyes dulling, was seared into Claire's memory. And though she had lived through enough ER calls to know how quickly things could turn, she wasn't prepared to feel this helpless. Not for a dog. Not for him. She looked down at June. The toddler stirred, brow furrowing in sleep, and a small whimper escaped her lips. Claire brushed a curl from her forehead and whispered, "Shoo, it's okay, baby. We're okay." But they weren't. Not entirely. The door to the treatment area opened, and Rachel, the vet tech with close-cropped curls and dark circles under her eyes, stepped into the room. She was tall and moved with a fluid kind of competence that reminded Claire of nurses on the third night of a double shift, exhausted but still moving forward. She approached slowly, her expression neutral but not cold. "He's stabilized for now," she said, crouching beside Claire's chair. "We've given antihistamines, fluids, and a light sedative to keep his stress down. Dr. Feldman thinks the worst of the allergic reaction is over, but we'll need to monitor his vitals closely for the next few hours." Claire nodded, but her throat was too tight to respond. Rachel offered a soft smile. "He's a strong one. Most dogs wouldn't have stood through that kind of swarm. But he did." "Didn't move from her side, huh?" Claire blinked quickly, trying to keep the tears from spilling. "No. He didn't even bark. He just took it." Rachel's smile deepened, not from amusement, but from recognition. "Yeah. The good ones always do." With a gentle touch on Claire's shoulder, Rachel stood and disappeared back behind the swinging doors. Claire held June a little tighter. A few minutes later, another figure entered the lobby, David, Claire's younger brother, summoned by a frantic voicemail she barely remembered leaving. He was in his late 20s, wiry, with shaggy hair tucked under a baseball cap and the unmistakable look of someone who'd rolled out of bed at the sound of an emergency. He wore jeans, a hoodie, and a look of confusion blended with concern. "Claire," he said, eyes widening as he approached. "What happened?" She exhaled a trembling breath. "It's Bruno. He saved her." David took a seat beside her, his body still tense. "Saved her? From what?" Claire told him everything. The planter, the yellow jackets, the moment Bruno lunged forward like a soldier stepping into fire. She kept her voice low, more for June's sake than anything else, and when she finished, David let out a long, low whistle. "That dog," he muttered. "I mean, I didn't get it before. Why you kept him so close to her. But now." Claire shook her head. "I almost thought he hurt her. For a second. I saw the pot, the bees, her crying. My brain just panicked." David leaned forward, elbows on knees. "But he didn't. He did the opposite." They sat in silence for a while. Time passed in a way that made no sense. Claire's phone buzzed with a new blog comment, she ignored it. Outside, clouds gathered slowly, hinting at the possibility of snow later in the day. And still, the doors stayed shut. Eventually, Rachel returned. "You can come see him," she said. "Just one of you. He's still out of it." Claire rose, her legs stiff. She handed June to David with a soft whisper. 5 minutes, okay. Down the corridor, past sterile walls and rooms that smelled like iodine and nerves, she found him. Bruno was lying on a thick foam mat, connected to an 4, his breathing shallow but steady. His fur had been carefully shaved in places to apply ointment, revealing tender pink skin beneath. The swelling had gone down slightly, but his eyes were still closed, and his limbs trembled now and then like a dog dreaming of running. Claire sat beside him on the floor, tucking her legs under herself. She didn't speak right away. Just watched him, absorbing the quiet pulse of life that lingered in his body despite everything. "I thought you hurt her," she finally whispered. "Just for a second. I saw you push her. I didn't understand." Bruno didn't stir, but she continued anyway. "I know better now. I saw the planter. The bees. I saw where you were standing. You didn't hesitate, not even for a heartbeat." Her voice cracked. "And I did." She reached out, fingers brushing the top of his paw, still twitching slightly, a reflex beyond consciousness. "I'm sorry," she said, the words so soft they barely formed. "I doubted you. And you were the only one who knew what to do." Bruno didn't move. But in that moment, Claire didn't need him to. The sky outside the veterinary clinic had turned a gunmetal gray, thick with snow clouds that hadn't yet decided whether they'd weep. Inside, the light was artificial, humming softly overhead in long fluorescent strips. Claire sat hunched forward in the corner of the observation room, her arms wrapped around her knees like a child trying to disappear into herself. Her hands still smelled of earth and panic. She hadn't changed clothes. June was back home, asleep under the watch of David, who had insisted Claire stay with Bruno. The minutes stretched thin. Then thick. Then longer than they should have been. Every beep from the monitors behind the closed ICU doors sent a sharp, involuntary twitch through her shoulders. There was a whiteboard near the receptionist's desk titled, "Today's Fighters." In black marker, someone had written in big crooked letters, "Bruno, anaphylactic recovery, strong boy." Claire wanted to laugh. She wanted to cry harder. 12 hours, they said. That's how long the critical window would be. If he survived those 12 hours, there was a good chance he'd pull through. But they didn't say it with confidence. They said it with vet clinic caution, the kind that hangs hope on a thread without ever promising it'll hold. Time bent strangely. A nurse in a red paw-print hoodie brought Claire coffee in a paper cup. Her name tag read Jessie, early 30s, freckles across her nose, short bob-dyed lavender at the tips. She didn't speak much. Just nodded and set the cup beside her gently, like any sudden movement might make the moment shatter. Claire took it with shaking fingers. "Thank you." Jessie gave a quiet, understanding smile, the kind only those who've sat beside too many tables and too many hurting things can offer. "He's got a good heart," she said softly, then turned and disappeared into the hallway. Claire didn't drink the coffee. She just held it. Like warmth might transfer from the paper into her bones. The next hour passed in waves. At one point, Claire stepped outside for air. The cold hit her like a slap, sharp and welcome. She paced along the sidewalk, arms hugging herself as she breathed in the smell of frost and distant pine. Her phone buzzed, but she didn't check it. She didn't want messages. Didn't want questions or updates. The only thing she wanted was inside, fighting for breath. She remembered things. The way Bruno would tilt his head when June laughed. How he'd stand between the stroller and passing strangers during their walks. How he never begged for food, but once gently nudged a piece of apple back toward June after she dropped it, like he understood what was hers wasn't his to take. He was still a puppy. Just over a year old. He hadn't yet grown into his paws, but already he carried a burden heavier than most. She whispered into the wind, "You're not just a dog." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Back inside, the clinic had dimmed for the night shift. Dr. Feldman, still in her white coat, now with her reading glasses pushed to the top of her head, entered quietly. Her face was tired but firm. The kind of expression born from decades of late-night emergencies and impossible odds. "His vitals are improving," she said. "Slightly. But steadily." Claire's chest trembled. "Does that mean?" Dr. Feldman raised a hand gently. It means he's fighting. It means you don't need to prepare for the worst yet. Claire nodded, covering her mouth as if the flood of emotion might escape. Would you like to sit with him? She nodded again. They led her through a back corridor lined with cages. Some held sleepy kittens, some old hounds with graying muzzles. One dog barked once, then fell quiet when Claire passed. At the far end was Bruno's enclosure, larger than the rest, dimly lit, filled with the scent of antiseptic and fur. He lay on a padded mat, IVs taped to his front leg, a monitor clipped to his ear. His breathing was labored but no longer frantic. He didn't lift his head when she entered. But his tail thumped, just once, against the mat. Claire knelt beside him. She didn't speak at first. Just rested a hand on his side, feeling the slow rise and fall. Her fingers traced along the shaved patch near his ribs, over the reddened skin, over the small plastic tube that held his line in place. You're not just a dog, she whispered again. You're ours. She didn't know how long she sat there. Maybe 30 minutes. Maybe 2 hours. Time softened around the sound of machines and the hum of the heater and the weight of everything that could have gone differently. She stayed until her legs fell asleep beneath her. Until someone brought her a blanket. Until the world outside the window began to lighten just slightly, a cold pre-dawn gray. Bruno hadn't stirred. But he was breathing. And that, for now, was enough. By the time morning arrived, Boulder had turned pale under a sheet of thin, glistening frost. The first light of dawn crept through the slats of the clinic blinds, casting stripes across the tile floor like prison bars made of gold. Claire sat curled in one of the molded plastic chairs just outside the ICU, her body aching from hours of stillness. The gray blanket someone had draped over her shoulders had long gone cold. Her phone, which had sat idle for most of the night, now buzzed softly with alerts, texts, and blog notifications. She didn't move. Her fingers were laced together tightly in her lap, knuckles white. Her eyes, bloodshot and dry, were fixed on the silent swinging doors of the treatment wing. She had counted every hour. She had whispered every kind of prayer, even the ones she hadn't believed in for years. But Bruno was still alive. And that was the thread she clung to. At some point during the night, she had opened her laptop. It had been almost automatic, her hands moving on their own, like they remembered how to keep her sane when nothing else could. She hadn't planned on writing. But when she opened the blog editor, the words spilled out faster than she could organize them. Last night, a dog jumped into a nest of wasps to save my daughter. He didn't bark. He didn't run. He just moved. Straight into the pain, like he knew what had to be done and didn't question it. I adopted him 2 weeks ago. I didn't know what kind of soul he carried, but now I do. And I almost didn't trust him. She didn't edit it. She didn't even title it. She just hit publish. Now, hours later, as the screen dimmed from lack of use, she glanced down and saw the counter. 1,923 views. 328 shares. 211 comments. It hadn't gone viral in the internet sense, but in the corner of her quiet world, it was spreading like a whispered truth, a story people felt mattered. A woman named Karen from New Mexico had commented, "I didn't think I'd cry at 6 a.m. But I needed this. Thank you. Give Bruno a kiss from all of us." Another, from a firefighter in Utah, had a rescue dog once. "Save me from myself. They know more than we think." Claire swallowed hard. Just then, the swinging doors opened with a soft push. Dr. Feldman appeared, her white coat half-buttoned and her stethoscope looped lazily around her neck. She looked tired, her salt and pepper hair frizzed at the crown like she'd been running her hands through it all night. But her eyes, sharp, hazel, and impossibly steady, were different. Claire stood instantly. Dr. Feldman gave her a small smile. Not the kind people give when trying to be polite, the kind they save for moments that actually matter. He made it, she said softly. Vitals are steady. Breathing is strong. He's alert. Claire's knees nearly buckled. A sound escaped her chest that was half sob, half laughter. She pressed her hands to her mouth as tears spilled over, hot and silent. The doctor stepped forward and rested a hand on Claire's arm, a brief touch, steadying. He's going to be sore. We'll keep him here for observation for another day or two. But he's out of danger now. Claire nodded rapidly, trying to speak but failing. Dr. Feldman tilted her head. Would you like to see him? Of course she did. Bruno lay in the same recovery room as before, but now he was awake. Barely. His eyes fluttered open when Claire entered, and his tail thumped the mat once, lazily but deliberately. His face was still swollen in places, and he had a large bandage wrapped around his flank, but the light in his eyes, that old, quiet flame, had returned. Claire sank to her knees beside him. You stupid, beautiful boy, she whispered. He blinked slowly, his gaze softening. She rested her forehead gently against his shoulder, careful not to press too hard, and exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. For a moment, the room around her disappeared. There was only fur and breath and the thrum of life that had nearly been lost. Outside the room, Jessie the vet tech watched through the glass. She had swapped her paw-print hoodie for scrubs, but the lavender tips of her hair still peeked from under her surgical cap. She smiled faintly, then turned toward the front to greet someone just entering. It was Sarah, the shelter volunteer from the day Claire had first adopted Bruno. She wore a long oatmeal-colored coat, a knitted scarf wrapped 3 times around her neck, and had a paper bag clutched under one arm. Her short silver hair was tousled by the wind, and her cheeks were pink from the cold. I heard, she said, handing Jessie the bag. Saw the blog. That dog. I knew he was waiting for someone. Guess he found her. Jessie nodded. She's in there now. Sarah leaned slightly to peek through the glass. Good boy, she whispered. Inside the room, Claire sat beside Bruno for a long while. She didn't take pictures. Didn't try to document it. Some moments didn't need witnesses to be real. Later that afternoon, she stepped outside to get some air. The frost had melted, leaving the sidewalk damp and reflective. She pulled out her phone to check on June. David had sent a photo, June asleep on the couch, clutching Bruno's old leash like a stuffed animal. Claire's chest ached at the sight. She opened the blog again, this time to post an update. He made it through the night. He's still sore, still weak, but he wagged his tail today. And I wept like a child. I used to think heroes wore uniforms. Now I know some of them just have fur. She clicked publish. This time, she gave it a title. The Hero Without a Crown. It was 2 days after the frost had melted and the town of Boulder returned to its usual mid-autumn hush. Leaves still littered the sidewalks, kicked into piles by neighborhood kids who wore too light jackets for the weather. The sun made brief appearances through long ribbons of cloud, and the wind carried the scent of chimney smoke and damp earth. On Oak Ridge Lane, where the Harper house stood with its red mailbox and creaky wooden steps, the porch had been swept clean, and the broken planter that once held the hidden yellow jacket nest was long gone. Inside the house, the atmosphere felt suspended, like the hush before a concert begins. Claire moved through it with quiet intention, lighting a candle in the kitchen, folding the throw blankets with extra care. Everything had a purpose this morning. Every motion was part of preparing to welcome someone back. Bruno was coming home. He had made it through the worst. After a long night under supervision and another spent regaining strength, Dr. Feldman had finally called with a clipped but cheerful voice, "He's ready. Might be a little unsteady for a while, but he's cleared." Claire didn't drive to pick him up alone. June sat strapped in her car seat, bouncing her legs and singing softly to herself. She didn't fully understand what had happened, but she'd sensed something had changed. In the past 2 days, she'd taken to pointing at the back door and repeating, "Booby you," with growing urgency. Now, as they pulled into the clinic parking lot, Claire glanced in the rearview mirror and smiled. Yes, baby. Booby you. Bruno was waiting in the reception area, lying on a mat by the front desk with a soft fleece blanket under him and a new, temporary collar around his neck. He looked smaller than before, not in size, but in energy. His shoulders drooped slightly, and his movements were deliberate, as if he was still figuring out where his weight belonged. His eyes, however, brightened the moment he saw them. When June spotted him, she let out a squeal of delight so loud that everyone turned. She wriggled in Claire's arms until she was set down, then toddled across the waiting room with her arms outstretched. Bruno's ears twitched. His tail, wrapped limply around his legs, gave one soft, slow thump. That was all she needed. June fell into his side with a giggle, pressing her cheek against his shoulder. Bruno didn't flinch. He just closed his eyes, nose twitching softly as if to say, "I remember." A long sigh left his chest. Claire crouched beside them, her hand resting gently on Bruno's neck. The fur was patchy there from shaving, and under her fingers, she felt the warm ridges of healing skin, the trail of stings and bites, of pain that had not been for nothing. She whispered, not to June this time, but to him. "I'm sorry. For doubting you. For hesitating. You didn't just save her life. You saved mine too." Rachel, the tech with lavender-tipped hair, appeared beside them with a folder of instructions and a small bag of medications. "He'll still be sore for a week or two," she said, kneeling to scratch gently behind Bruno's ear. "No rough play. Keep him warm. Hydrate. You know the drill." Claire nodded, blinking away fresh tears. "I think we'll be okay." As they drove home, June fell asleep in the back seat, one hand still clutching Bruno's leash like it was a comfort blanket. Bruno lay across the trunk space, head tucked between his paws, eyes half-lidded but always watching. The road felt quieter. Softer. That night, Claire lit a second candle on the kitchen table. A silent ritual. She placed Bruno's bed near the fireplace, even though she knew he'd end up curled by June's crib again before long. After dinner, Claire uploaded a new post to her blog. This one didn't go viral. It didn't need to. It was titled, "The Scar That Stayed." He has a mark down his side now. The fur may never grow back quite right. People ask what happened. I tell them it's a love mark, a reminder of what sacrifice looks like. Not all heroes wear vests. Some just wait quietly by the door until you finally understand they were never trying to prove anything. They were just waiting to be seen. Later, Claire sat on the living room rug while June played with her wooden blocks, clumsily stacking towers only to knock them down and start again. Bruno lay nearby, half dozing, ears twitching every time June laughed. There was a knock on the door, gentle, rhythmic. It was Sarah from the shelter. She wore the same oatmeal-colored coat, now dusted with leaves, and carried a small box wrapped in butcher paper. "I thought he might need this," she said, stepping inside with careful movements. Her eyes fell on Bruno, then softened. "He looks like he knows he's home." Claire took the box and opened it to reveal a handmade tag, "Bruno's blanket, stitched with thanks, from all of us." The fabric inside was thick, forest green with little paw prints stitched in gold along the edge. Claire swallowed the knot rising in her throat. "Thank you," she said. Sarah gave a knowing smile, her silver hair catching the firelight. "Sometimes the ones we think are too damaged, are just waiting for someone to see the parts that aren't." They sat together for a while, sipping tea in the quiet warmth of the room. June, oblivious to the sentiment, babbled happily to her blocks. Bruno's breathing deepened as he slept. Before leaving, Sarah leaned down, gently placed her hand on Bruno's back, and said, "You did good, boy." When the door closed behind her, Claire looked again at the blanket, then at the scar along Bruno's ribs. She reached down and touched it softly. "People will ask," she murmured. And I'll tell them the truth. She smiled, her voice low but steady. It's the scar of love. Sometimes, the ones we fear or doubt at first are the ones who end up saving us, not just in big, dramatic moments, but in quiet, ordinary ones too. Bruno didn't need words, or medals, or applause. He just needed someone to see him. In our own lives, how often do we overlook the quiet protectors around us, the friend who checks in, the neighbor who watches from a distance, or even the pet that waits at the door every night? If this story moved you, help us share it. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and comment below. What's one moment when someone, or some animal, showed you unexpected loyalty? We'd love to read your story.